Today I would like to talk about dystopian novels. But before focusing on the term dystopian, I would like to trace the origin of the word utopia. So let's go back a few centuries to the 15th and the 16th century and look at a work which was published by the writer Thomas More in 1516. We're in the period in which humanism began to develop, and Thomas More actually coined the term utopia, publishing a work titled Utopia in 1516. The work was written in Latin, and the term utopia comes from topia, place, meaning no place. But there is also another interpretation of the term, which could be seen as good plus place, that is, a better place to live. So what does utopia mean? Utopia is an ideal place to live. It's a perfect place, ideal from a moral point of view, a political point of view, and a social point of view, and not only. And this is what Thomas More depicts in his work. But the work is divided into two parts. In the first part, Thomas More describes the England of his time, of the 16th century. The description is not particularly flattering because he describes a corrupted environment where the nobility abuses of its power, where there is a misuse of private property, and there is lots of poverty and unemployment. This is Thomas More's perception of the England of his time. And the same way he depicted his homeland, he also described this ideal place, this utopia. And this is also very personal. Obviously, if I asked you what an ideal place is for you, what are the features of an ideal place, each of you would give me a different answer. For Thomas More, this mysterious island was a place where there was religious tolerance, where people could not work for more than 6 hours a day, where the king, the sovereign, was elected, chosen by the people, where the property was shared, there was no private property, and also where hunting was abolished, for example. This obviously is a very subjective issue, the issue of hunting. So in Thomas More's utopia, hunting was abolished. War was despised, but also luxury was despised. So this dialogue that Thomas More has in the work with this mysterious traveler who has seen many lands develops into the description of this marvelous, perfect world according to Thomas More. What have critics said about this world? That Thomas More was inspired by Vespucci's New World, Mondo Nuovo, in which Vespucci actually described the discovery of America. So many people, many critics have made connections between the idea of America symbolizing the perfect world. What was Thomas More's opinion on colonial expansion? Thomas More believed that if there is land that is not inhabited, or that is inhabited by very few people, and the colonizer wants to occupy the land, the natives are also almost obliged to welcome the newcomers. And if the natives do not welcome the newcomers, then the latter can wage war against the natives. So this idea of people moving to a new world and colonizing it was accepted and considered a positive thing by Thomas More. So he supported colonization. We also have to consider that this was a period of great colonial expansion, not only obviously as concerns America, but it is the period in which many lands were colonized, and not only by the British. So More supported colonization, and this work was to inspire many other movements and writers and also politicians, political views in the centuries that were to come. They were the principles of democracy, of brotherhood, and of freedom were to inspire the principles of the Enlightenment, also the principles of the revolutions, in particular the French Revolution. More's works also inspired what then became a sort of a dystopian novel, that is Swift's Gulliver's Travels. And Swift's Gulliver's Travels eventually inspired George Orwell's dystopian novel. So let's move from the 16th century, 1516, to the 20th century, to the century of dystopian novels. Dystopia is obviously the antonym of utopia. It is no longer a good place to live, an ideal place to live, but it is a bad place to be. One of the main features which the utopian works and dystopian novels have in common is the fact that there is a social order in both. There is a social order in Utopia, there is a social order in George Orwell's 1984. So, but obviously we're speaking about different types of social order. There is also a social order in Huxley's Brave New World. So let's have a look at the development of dystopian novels very briefly. These novels developed in particular in the 20th century, but as we said, Jonathan Swift had already written Gulliver's Travels, which in actual fact did represent a world that was partly nonsensical and which reflected the corruption of his time. If we want to have a look at what is called dystopian novel in the 20th century, then we're looking mainly at Aldous Huxley and George Orwell. Aldous Huxley, who published Brave New World during the 30s, and George Orwell's work 1984. These works are similar from some points of view, but they're very different from other points of view. They're both dystopian works which describe dystopian realities, but if on one hand in 1984 a totalitarian regime is described by Orwell, a regime where everything is under control, everything is controlled by the media, and people are deprived of their freedom and are deprived of history. History is rewritten. The Big Brother and the Ministry of Truth And the thought police practically control everybody and everything, even the way people think. On the other hand, Aldous Huxley's work presents a world that is bombarded by media, where the fear is not so much of not having enough information, but of having too much information. In Huxley's work, for instance, people live frivolous lives. They live just by gaming all the time, playing, having casual sex, taking drugs, and killing all forms of art in society. This is another aspect that Orwell's works and Huxley's works have in common. In both cases, in both these novels, art is dead. So on one hand we have Orwell's totalitarian regime, society which is deprived of any form of freedom and where everybody is controlled, even thoughts and emotions. People cannot fall in love, not even fall in love. On the other side, we have a society that is deprived of all its depth. It is frivolous, it is deprived of art, and it is deprived of anything that can actually make people think deeply about things. So, very, very briefly, this is the origin of dystopian novels. If we don't look at Thomas More's work, it is very, very hard for us to understand Orwell and Huxley's works. Next time we will talk about Orwell and his masterpiece, 1984.